Hello and welcome to the School Leadership Show. Mike isn't here today, so I'll be hosting solo. I'm Jen David Lang, and in addition to co-hosting this podcast, I also run The Main Idea. Basically, I read tons of education and leadership books and summarize only the best ones for educational leaders all over the world as part of a subscription service. You can subscribe at themainidea.net. And that is how I came across Principal Kafele's latest and 14th book, I believe. What is my value instructionally to the teachers I supervise? Principal Kafele, as he is known, was a deeply effective educator in New Jersey, close to me in Brooklyn, for over 20 years. He started as an award-winning elementary teacher and was later a middle and high school principal, becoming a turnaround leader, turning his school from one that needed improvement to a nationally recognized school. And now he is clearly a prolific writer. He speaks all over the US. I could list his accolades all day, but would rather you hear from him directly. So welcome to the show, Principal Kafele.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Glad you are here. So you and I have something in common. We are both worried that principals get a bit overwhelmed by all of the day-to-day non-instructional aspects of the job. So that makes it very hard to focus on the instructional side. That is ensuring that all teachers are providing high levels of achievement for all students, the whole reason we're here. That's why I started The Main Idea, to help leaders read and learn more in less time. And you write about this in your latest book. So can you share more about this concern, about the non-instructional activities interfering with this essential role? How did you come to have this concern? Maybe share your own stories about not focusing enough on instructional leadership when you were an AP or an early principal, despite working 75 hours a week and regularly popping into classrooms. Can you speak to that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And first and foremost, just in terms of my own professional learning, for a large portion of my adult life, I was a voracious reader,
Mm.
just reading, particularly around history and education. And once and that was throughout my teaching years as well. Somehow, some way, I was able to continue to read at a high level. But once I became an administrator, particularly a principal, not so much an assistant principal, I found that it was very challenging to keep up with the kind of reading that I wanted to keep up with. And, this is long before podcasting, internet, in fact, and for the public was brand spanking new. So, that wasn't an option. So I didn't know what to do. I was reading, whenever I could, it just fit it in. And then obviously whatever professional learning we got through the district and then national conferences and so forth. So instructional leadership, therefore, I didn't consider myself to be one until probably 3 years in, because I'm trying to figure out the principalship coming off of a very non-productive assistant principalship where I was a full-time disciplinarian. So I knew how to get the position of principal, but I wasn't prepared to be a principal, if that makes sense. I understood the process of becoming one. So now here I am coming off of this counterproductive, non-productive AP experience, and I've got to figure out principal leadership in real time on the job. So reading, that was almost non-existent at that point. But once I started figuring it out and I could start reading again, the books that I would be drawn to mostly would be the books that were not too thick, because again, I'm putting in 12 to 14 hours a day, particularly when you think about extracurricular activities and athletics. So I'm working a lot of hours. So on the one hand, I'm looking for the book that's a quicker read, an easier read, but I want to read. But on the other hand, I was an author by then. I was an author since 1991. So in the early years of my teaching career. So from the beginning, I guess I understood instinctively and was inspired by certain authors that keep them thin, particularly since I'm writing for educators. Keep them thin because these folks are busy. They're super busy. They're hyper busy, particularly if you're a school leader. And hence, as a writer, that's what I do. But as instructional leader, I figured it out along the way.
Mhm. That's great. That's impressive. And did you just have this light bulb yourself, or did you have a mentor who said, hey, you got to focus more on instruction if you want to move the school?
Yeah, Mentor from afar in terms of the writing style, and just the shortness of the book. But
Yeah.
in terms of instructional leadership, it was a light bulb. It wasn't a mentor that I saw. It was just something that I had to figure out. It's something, see, when you think about grad school, we spent a lot of time on instructional leadership, but that was grad school, that was professors, that was textbooks. It was an author that was whose name will stay with me forever, Thomas Sergiovanni,
Mhm.
and these thick 500-page books and so forth. But that didn't translate for me in terms of the environment that I knew I was going to be working in, which was my home environment. I'm from East Orange, New Jersey, and I worked in East Orange, New Jersey. So it didn't translate because there was so many other variables that I knew needed to be addressed. And those were the areas that I was addressing. But the instructional side, that had to come together for me where I said the rubber meets the road. If instruction is not superior, then all the other ancillary things that I'm trying to do, they're not going to happen because instruction is not happening in the classroom. That was on me.
Yeah.
That was on the administrators in the building. That was on the instructional coaches.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's hard to take those books that we read in grad school and operationalize them, right? It's one thing to
Yeah.
read, it's another thing to implement. So you've written many books. So what compelled you to write this latest book now? This book, What is My Value Instructionally to the Teachers I Supervise? Why now?
Yeah, and it's interesting because every time I write a book,
Yeah.
in my mind, I've got nothing else. Like I'm done. There's nothing else within my skill set and in the areas that I'm passionate about that that I can come up with. Where I'm done. So I thought after I wrote the assistant principal identity, that was it. I don't have any more books in me. But I had started a live stream called the AP and New Principles Academy. And I was talking instructional leadership, because the focus was on the assistant principal. We called it the Virtual AP Leadership Academy. So every Saturday morning, I'm talking about instructional leadership to assistant principals because those are the ones that need to hear it most. Principals as well as their supervisors, but the AP really needs to hear that because there's a mindset across America, not to paint with too broad of a brush, but there is a mindset that the AP is the one that deals with the other stuff and not necessarily the instructional side of their leadership. So talking it so much, I said to myself, there's a book there. And hence the book, What is My Value Instructionally to the Teachers I Supervise. I don't think I could almost say definitively that had there not been a pandemic, there would not have been that Saturday live stream because that I only did that because we were all at home. So and thereby I wouldn't have been talking instructional leadership literally every 7 days on a Saturday morning. So because of that, and now here we are on week number 267, and I'm still talking it every Saturday. That book was born. So just to give you a sense of of the process, because I was talking it so much, when it was time to write it, I blocked out a month in my travel schedule to write this book. So May of 2024, I accepted no engagements in May, and I would just write the book and finish it in 31 days. I finished this book in 18 days because I was writing around the clock. Everything that was in my head from all those Saturday sessions, I'm
Mhm.
just writing and writing and writing, and hence here it is, a real thing.
Yeah,
So and but I consider it the most significant, the most important book that I've ever written
yeah,
because again, it's where the rubber meets the road. And
yeah.
if you got teachers in classrooms and they're relying on the professional development that we provide them, which is external,
Mhm.
but we're not providing the internal professional development, which is that relationship, that collegial relationship between administration, instructional coaches, and teacher, then we're missing the boat by a long shot.
Yeah.
And hence that's why this book is on the market.
Okay, great. Well, we'll get to a lot of these. We'll get to a link to your virtual
Yeah,
AP Academy as well as the internal PD. I'm impressed with how quickly you wrote the book. Maybe some of the best books are written quickly. I'm doing a reread of Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I
yeah,
never realized, she wrote it in 7 weeks, which is just an
yeah,
incredible feat.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Anyway, so we digress. But so we'll get to these. So the title of the book is a question, right? You know, not too many books that is the title. It's a question, and it's a question. It's not you. It's do I, right? What is my value instruction to the teachers I supervise? So obviously, so for people who don't know, a big theme of this book is self-reflection. And
That's
part
right.
of why I wanted to interview you now in June, it's the end of the year, where leaders are more likely to carve out some time for reflection. And your book is organized around 10 reflective questions that help leaders focus on their role as instructional leader. There were like
Yeah.
a million questions in the book, but 10 overarching ones. I was starting to count, I couldn't count them all. So tell us a little bit about why is self-reflection so important? How do you self-reflect as concretely as you can share? And any suggestions for leaders who do not yet have a habit of self-reflecting?
Yeah, I love the question. The every book that I've written is self-reflective. I don't know where that came from,
Mm,
but it just made sense to me that I need to write and present in a way that the reader or the audience reflects upon self in
mm,
the process. So when you're reading, when one is reading a book that I've written, it's not just my content. Everything begins with my question for you to ask yourself, right? So nothing in the second person. So ask yourself, in this case, what is my value?
mm,
Right? Or like the overarching question outside of that to the book, is there a correlation between is there a correlation between my leadership and the continued improvement of instruction of my teachers, right?
mm,
So if I present that as a workshop question, right? I want the audience members to literally sit there and look within self like, wow. And a lot of the response I get is, "Oh my God, this guy just punched me in the gut," right? I hear that a lot, right? It's
yep,
or the room just remains silent for the entire 6, 7 hour presentation, and that used to bug me, but
mm,
it doesn't anymore because I know what it is. And then I'll even ask the audience, "Are you all quiet because you're in such reflection?" And they'll say, "Yes." that that's that's why I'm so quiet. You know, some will even say things like, "You've got me questioning my own leadership." So as an author, that's the way I present it because I don't just want the reader to listen to my thoughts,
mhm,
right? My research, my experience. I want the leader to literally look at themselves in that building, the building that they lead or the AP, a building that they're part of the leadership and say, who am I as it relates to this profound question that was just raised for me to ask myself. That's where I want the reader to be. So that has been my style from book one. Why? How did I come up with? I don't know. But I will say this, and maybe this is the correlation, that it's how I live my life.
yep,
I'm self reflective in everything that I do. I want to be better than I was yesterday, as cliche as that may sound. I want to be better than I was yesterday at what I do. If I will tell my audience that I'm here speaking to you, but I will be on a plane in a few hours and I will be reflecting upon this presentation,
yep,
asking myself, are there things I could have said
mhm,
that things I said that I could have said differently. And I literally be that transparent and vulnerable with pretty much the proverbial 99.9% of my audiences. I'll tell them because I'm modeling for them that's significant. So what better way than to be vulnerable and transparent in front of an audience and say, I'm going to assess me
yep,
for you,
yep,
right? So therefore, the third part of your question is leader. You have got to be reflective. So there's another book title of another book I wrote in 2018. Is my school a better school because I lead it? What is my value instructionally to the teachers I supervise is an outgrowth of that title. So because a large part of that answer, because that question was for me. So a large part of that answer was who was I as it related to instructional leadership, and hence the title of the newest book. But I'm saying here to the leaders that will see this interview, you've got to reflect upon your practice all the time. right?
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be at the end of a day, the end of the month, the end of a year. It can be in real time, different situations that you're grappling with. Can you some way hit a pause button and just reflect on or upon that situation? So in that reflection, it really comes in four levels. It's the first, and I always keep a mirror close by as just a reminder.
Those
It's very
listening, yeah,
symbolic.
I just want to say for those listening, he just literally held up a
Yeah,
mirror.
yeah, hold up a
Go
mirror.
ahead.
It's self-reflection first, and that's non-judgmental, just reflecting upon you, your practice, your mindset, your attitude, what you wake up with in the morning as far as your attitude, right? And then you take that all the way to the end of the day. But again, non-judgmentally, just reflecting, perhaps even, I shouldn't say perhaps, I suggest having a journal, writing it out so that you can refer back to it later.
You were
So,
stronger than that in the book. You said in the book, absolutely write it down because you can't
yeah,
notice patterns. If you're just reflecting in your mind, do you think we remember what happened? I mean,
no
at
way
our
in the
age or
world.
any age, September 2nd versus September 3rd. So
No
you
way
went
in
out
the
of
world.
your way to say write it down.
Write it down.
Yeah,
Write it down. Use the journal.
yeah.
So that's that self-reflection, non-judgmentally. Secondly, self-assessment. Now
Mhm.
you want to be judgmental. And as I say to school leaders, district leaders all the time, we are not in position to wait for our evaluators of record to
Yeah.
inform us of our effectiveness because that could be a very long wait, particularly if it's perceived that you are doing a good job, right? If it's perceived that you're doing well, you may not hear from folks for a long time outside to keep up the good work. I had a superintendent over a span of time that went 3 years without an evaluation
Mhm.
because the superintendent was impressed with my work. So he just kept saying, "Keep up the great work, Kafele. Keep it up. Keep doing what you do." But nothing in that is going to allow me to grow.
Mhm.
Right. It's just that I don't have somebody breathing down my neck, but I'm not growing with that. So if one is serious about growth, you want someone that's going to critique you, someone who's going to supervise you, right? So I say that if you don't have that, and even if you do have it, it's not going to come to you every day. So you gotta engage in the self-assessment. And again, you want to write that out and you want to assess you, but you want to be brutally honest. Now, can you assess all facets of education? I mean, of leadership? No. You want to pinpoint what are the most important, what are the most critical aspects of what you do every day. For me, in terms of the everyday, it was two things, as I
Mhm.
write about in the book. It was instructional leadership and it was student engagement. I needed to know everybody in that building. I needed them to know me. I needed access to them. I wanted them to have access to me. I wanted to know them because I wanted to have a family in that building. So other aspects of the leadership were important, but for me, the two that were most critical outside of school safety was who I was as instructional leader and who I was as one who engaged young people.
Mhm.
So as I would ask myself every day at the end of the year, at the end of the day, literally staring at the facade of the building, is my school a better school because I lead it? My answers were rooted in who was I instructionally and who was I conversationally with young people.
Mhm.
And that was the basis of the question, and that's what allowed me to grow. Again, other areas were important. It doesn't mean I ignored them, but I had to be on point with those two. And those were me, as I tell all of my audiences, I'm not imposing those on anybody in the room. I'm
Mhm.
saying you determine what's most critical to your leadership, and then you go hard on it. Those were the two most critical for me.
That's great. Well, two things. One, first of all, I think that your bravery in asking yourself these questions and your holding other leaders to task is no different from what we're asking teachers to do, right?
Yeah,
When
yeah,
teachers sometimes make excuses in the classroom, right? It was the curriculum. It was these kids. It was, I have 34 kids in my class, right? We try to get them to take ownership, right? What are you responsible for? We know the number one factor in influencing student achievement is the teacher. So we
yeah.
want them to take ownership, right? So
That's
then
right.
the second most important factor is the leader. So we need to take ownership over our instructional leadership as well.
Right. And you know something? Someone listening to this is going to say, "You said four levels, and you only gave us two. So let me get let me give them
Yeah,
the
yeah,
other
yeah.
two."
No, but I was pausing you. You're going to get to the other
Oh,
two. So,
okay.
so if I could tease out for our listeners, so
Yeah,
if they
yeah.
take nothing from this podcast except for the idea of a daily reflective practice, and you have so many questions in your book, which obviously no one can address every day. If they were to just reflect on those two questions every day, right? Um, who was I instructionally today, and who was I conversationally with young people today? Do you think that would be a good place to start?
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry. Go
Absolutely.
ahead to your third level. I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah.
Think about there are schools, and I serve as a coach as well, so I do a lot of one-to-one. So I'm in schools on school days, and it becomes so blatantly obvious within the first 2 minutes of walking down the hall when I'm in a school with a leader that does not know the students, and the students don't know the leader. It doesn't even take 5 minutes,
No,
right?
yeah.
It's just clear, particularly when the leader decides to put on a show for me and say good morning to the students as we walk past them, right? If that's something that's been happening before I was there, then the students are responding back good morning. But when the principal is saying good morning to students as they're walking by and they're looking at him as if he has three heads,
Yeah.
then I know that you're just performing for me. This is not standard practice for you at all in addressing or speaking to the students in the morning, greeting the students in the morning. So those other two, self-reflection, self-assessment leads to self-adjustment.
Mhm.
Self-adjustment. If you're going to assess yourself, you're going to find some flaws. You're going to find some deficiencies. So what are you going to do with them? Just continue to do what you've been doing, or you're going to make a change. You're going to make a shift. Well, you got to write that out because if you're writing it out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you may not remember it's 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock the next morning. So you got to write it out,
Yeah.
right? And therefore you can refer back to it. So you got that self-reflection, self-assessment, self-adjustment, which leads to self-improvement. That is the goal every day. You're not trying to become superstar the next day. You just want to have incremental growth by the day. So at the end of the day, when I ask myself, is my school a better school because I lead it? You can answer that question in the affirmative because you see the growth from the day before. It doesn't mean that the third day that that you'll be once again at a no, right? But that's the good thing about it because it allows you to continue to assess your own performance.
I like it. It's almost like a leadership roadmap to change these
Yeah,
four levels.
absolutely.
And and you're right, it has to be incremental, but it also has to, you have to reflect. Otherwise, when changes happen, how do you know if it's a result of what you did or didn't do if you're not really keeping track? So I think that's very useful, those four stages.
That's right.
You
And
write about a lot in the book. I want to ask about one part that really struck me. Um, Instructional leadership to be effective cannot be the sole job of the principal. And
right,
you talk about how, you were dumped, all the discipline was dumped on you as the assistant principal and you didn't question it. And most people don't question it. We think that's what assistant principals are here for, right? To do all the discipline. But really, you're one principal with 20, 30, 40, 50, 80 teachers. You can't possibly oversee all of the instructional leadership in the school. So you write a lot in your book about the leadership team and how principals can ensure that their whole leadership team takes on the role of instructional leader.
that's
And
right.
yeah, one of your questions is one of your reflective questions is, am I confident that my leadership team members are the instructional leaders I need them to be? And then you had some other questions. In what ways do I hold my leadership team accountable for being effective instructional leaders? And then another one, are we as a leadership team continually collaborating on what effective pedagogy looks like? So
That's
can you
right.
talk a little bit about the imperative to involve your whole leadership team as instructional
Yeah.
leaders, and how do you move in that direction?
Let me draw an analogy first. Um, I'm a sports guy. And in my audiences, there are always a percentage of the people who are sports people. Usually that's not the majority, but there are some, but I'll keep it, as I say to them, I'm gonna keep it so simple that even the one that despises sports, you'll be able to follow along. So I'll say to the folks, I say in the sport of football, I'll either ask the question or I'll just state it myself. In the sport of football, how often do you think if a team plays once a week on a Sunday or a Monday or a Thursday, how often do you think the head coach and the assistant coaches meet as a unit? And the folks who know football will say every day. So yeah, absolutely. Even on game day. So every day, 7 days a week, there is collaboration. There's not a day off. We're not going to think about football today, not during the season, right? So I say, okay, in my mind, and you rescue me if I'm wrong, but football is as much as we love it, it is not as significant as the work that we do during the day in these schools. Can we all agree? And they'll say, yes, I agree. So to the administrators, this is if I'm working with an administrative audience, obviously. To the administrators, do you all meet every day? And in the room, that's one of those questions where the room is going to go silent.
Yeah.
And and because they know. So when we start disclosing, there's a lot of folks in the room, they may say, we meet once every 2 weeks, right? Or we meet once a week. Or we see each other in the hallway, right? Or we see each other in the cafeteria, that type of thing. So, but not coming together. And I say to them before I go to that point, there's so much that transpired
Yeah.
just in a day, just in a half day, and your team is not coming together to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
You're waiting a week,
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks before you have that discussion on something that happened 2 weeks ago. Yet there are so many things that happen. I don't mean bad things, just things, whatever that means, that have occurred over the course of 2 weeks. So if in the during the football season, the team is meeting every single day, how do we justify as building administrators not meeting? Right. So at that point, nobody wants to talk now. They're like, oh my God, this guy just hit us. He hit us hard on that one. So, I mean, so to me, there's just a need to have conversation. I don't mean we got to be in the office all night. I don't mean or the conference room all night. But it does mean we need to talk about what this day was,
Mm-hmm.
right? So with that chapter you alluded to, and that's the longest chapter in the book, and that's the longest workshop that I do. In fact, it's so long that I'll probably never get to the whole thing with anybody in America, right? Because no, it's because when I created a presentation, it was just so much. So I'm in the process of breaking it up into these little mini presentations. But anyway, there's just so much to talk about when we talk about maximizing the effectiveness of the leadership team.
Yeah.
Right. And as I talked about in that chapter, there are different skill sets sitting in those rooms. There are different age categories sitting in those rooms, and therefore a different level of experience and wisdom sitting at those tables. And we're not tapping into them. It's just got to be a part of the leadership repertoire that we are having these conversations. I mean, imagine one, and this is for the audience. Imagine you're the principal of the building and you have X number of teachers that you supervise, which is just a portion. But then you've got your other administrators, depending on the size of the team, it may be just one other, or you may be the only one, and then therefore this is a different conversation. But if there's at least one, what is your knowledge
Yeah.
of what that relationship is doing, the functionality of the relationship between your assistant principal
Yeah.
or your associate principal, whatever it is. What is your knowledge and understanding of that, knowing that there are standardized assessments coming,
Mm.
right? The issue may not even be the teacher in the classroom. The issue may be your team member.
Yeah.
But if you're not having that conversation, you don't know what's going on. You're walking into that building leadership blind every
Mhm.
day.
Mhm. I have a particular interest in leadership teams. I do a full day workshop on Build Your Dream Team as well.
Mm,
And I love your concrete recommendation, the comparison with the football team, the coaches and how frequently to meet. But I'm curious about some high leverage activities for the leadership team meeting. So
mm,
don't confuse quantity and quality, because
yeah,
in the same way, our teachers sometimes get together and focus their team meeting time on the details of a field trip or focusing on one student when they're not focusing on teaching and learning. So
yeah.
what are some concrete high level activities that principals can make sure their leadership team is engaging in so they're not just talking about, the administrative aspects of the job.
Yeah, well, we can go write the content
Yeah.
because you figure like I'm big on culturally relevant pedagogy,
Mhm.
right? Culturally relevant teaching and learning.
Mhm.
So in a conversation, it's one thing to have the administrative conversation, but I want to get to the nuts and bolts of teaching and learning,
Mhm.
right? And I want to make sure that if I've got a certain member on my team who just has a passion for culturally relevant pedagogy, then I know there's a higher probability that it's getting done with that particular administrator and that cohort of teachers.
Mhm.
But what about everybody else,
Yeah.
right? Maybe I don't even know the language of culturally relevant pedagogy. Maybe I don't know what that is. Maybe my politics won't allow me to embrace it. There's so many factors there. So I need to have that conversation on an ongoing basis. But then maybe there's an article that we need to read together. Maybe there's a blog post. Maybe there's a chapter. Maybe there's a whole book that we need to read together to break
Mhm.
this down. This is what we used to do with staff. As principal with my staff with book studies. So the same thing to increase the probability that we're on the same page as it relates to this vision of the leadership of the principal.
Yeah. Yeah. So focus on content, focus on pedagogy, and the
Yeah,
same way we expect teachers to
yeah.
do. Well,
So
yeah.
when you say pedagogy, so now when we go in the classrooms and we could see certain pedagogical practices that in terms of appearance,
Yeah.
they look really good.
Yes.
But then when you break it down to substance, it's really counterproductive, right?
Yeah.
Well, what if I've got one of the leaders on that team that's going into classrooms in a very superficial way? I'm just popping in the rooms.
Yeah.
There's no conversation on the front end or the back end. I'm
Yeah.
just popping in, but the instruction looks really good. So I'm pleased with what I see.
Sure. The kids are quiet. Yeah.
Yeah, they're quiet and the teacher's charismatic and all this stuff. And we need to have that conversation of what's really good pedagogy for the students of the zip codes
Mhm.
that attend our school,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And I always say, and I reference it in the book, instructional leaders need to be a part of these conversations. They do not need to stay for the entirety of a meeting because most of that meeting, a lot of that meeting is not going to be relevant for them. But in terms of instruction, if we as an administrative team are going to talk instruction,
Yeah.
then the instructional coaches need to be a part of the conversation.
So, yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
we often get stuck, and you have a question about this with how we used to teach, right? And
yeah.
so one of the questions in the book, one of the reflective questions you have is, what do I know about excellent pedagogy beyond who I
Who I
was as
was
a
as a
classroom
teacher.
teacher? And that applies to all of your leadership team members as well, right?
That's right. That's
So
right.
it's really about what type of professional learning you're doing as a leader and the members of your leadership team are doing. So you've mentioned articles and books. Is there anything else you recommend for profession that you've found in terms of professional learning that's useful for the principal and the leadership team?
Yeah. No, are you talking about in terms of my own work or are you talking about beyond my work?
No, I'm talking about, yeah. So, you're working with a principal and a leadership team, right? And you want their understanding of pedagogy to move
Oh,
beyond how they taught 3, 5, 10, 20 years ago, right? What are some of the best ways for them to develop
yeah.
the
No, I got you. I
skills? Yeah,
got you. Yeah. It's and see that, the reason I included that in the book
yeah.
was because I struggled with that.
Mhm.
As a rookie, as a baby leader,
Yeah,
I'm trying to create a bunch of miniature teacher kafeles in the
yeah.
building because that's all I knew.
Right.
So now I had to delve deeper, and I
Yeah.
still do. Haven't been a teacher since 1998, 97, but I'm still going to breakout sessions at conferences that are teacher oriented just to sharpen my tools, right?
Mhm.
So as that leader on that team, part of that conversation is around what are we doing
Yeah,
to grow
yeah,
within our leadership.
yeah,
But if we're not having that conversation led by that principal, you may have leaders on your team who are literally not growing,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're regressing.
Yeah.
because the last time they engaged in any real professional learning was grad school.
Yeah.
So a part of those, I mean, it's so much with the team, right? But a part of those conversations with the team, what are we learning?
Yeah.
What what are we learning beyond what we already know?
Yeah.
What we did when we were in those classrooms teaching? Because if I have, let's say, for example, thinking about myself as a teacher, a lot of my personality just shined through my
Mhm.
teaching. It was who I was. So I brought that to my practice. A lot of what I did was not to this day is not transferable to a teacher whose worldview
Mhm.
is not is it doesn't match my own.
Yeah.
See who I was pedagogically was rooted or grounded in my worldview.
Yeah.
I looked at myself not just as a classroom teacher.
Yeah.
Who I was in the classroom was my activism,
Yeah.
right? It was my community leadership, if you will,
Mhm.
right? So I want to build these citizens who go out and change the world.
Yeah.
Well, that teacher in the classroom who I just want to teach my kids to read and write.
Yeah.
That's a different mindset.
Yeah.
Now, as principal, I want to help that teacher to evolve, but in the interim, that's not who that teacher is, right? So therefore, a guy like me or a leader like me that's bringing my approach to this teacher who that's not who that teacher is, and I'm trying to make you into me, that's not going to work.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why you got to keep reading, and it's
Yeah,
why, even though my service, the main idea is for school leaders and district leaders, I continue to summarize books that are about pedagogy, instruction, literacy, math, all those kinds of things, because you gotta keep learning.
yeah,
I'm going to try to hit two quick questions because I know I've kept you for a while, but you talk about there are a lot of interruptions to the work of instructional leadership, right? I mean, obviously leaders have to manage buildings. There's a lot they have to deal with. So since you gave us a number, a meeting every day for leadership teams, do you have a number, like an approximate amount of time you think principals should spend on instructional leadership? And do you have any tips for minimizing those interruptions, which are inevitable in the life of a school
yeah, I
system?
do. In terms of your second part, the first part, there are a lot of folks that will quantify it, like they should be spending X number of hours, X percentage of time in a classroom. I tend not to do that
Okay.
because every day is different, right? Every experience is a different one. What I instead like to say is you've got to make it your goal
Mhm.
to spend maximum time in a classroom, but I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to give you a percentage, right?
Mhm.
So here's the thing. A principal or an assistant principal may say, but there's so much on my plate that I just don't have the time to
Mhm.
spend the kind of time that I want in a classroom.
Mhm.
And almost 100% of the time, the reason that they don't have the time, and I'm sure you know this, is because the culture, the prevailing culture of that school will not afford them the time that they want to spend in a
Mhm.
classroom or
Mhm.
the time they want to spend in a pre or post observation conversation. So now as a leadership team, we've got to come together, and maybe the full agenda is the culture of the building from the time youngsters walk into the building, just cross the threshold of the front entrance until the time the last student leaves the building. So now let's look at the culture of the school
Mhm.
from between that large block of time.
Mhm.
What's happening?
Mhm.
And as we break it down by the minute as to what's happening, we're going to find some things that need to be adjusted. And as
Mhm.
we start making those adjustments, it's going to free up a lot of time.
Yeah,
Because, see, I remember rookie me, I'm dealing with stuff all day.
yeah, yeah.
Veteran me says to the secretary when I finish my morning message, I'll see you this afternoon about 1 or 2 o'clock. Call me if you need me. Right. So, see, because I understood culture by then.
Mhm.
So there's an expression I use all the time. The culture of the school is a direct reflection of the leadership of the building.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we have led the effort in creating a culture that is conducive to a leader being the instructional leader that he
Mhm.
wants to be, that he or she wants to be and must be.
Mhm. I really, I so appreciate that because it's a really unique perspective. I don't know how many people, when they think of instructional leadership, that they really think of it as connected to the culture.
Yeah,
And it really is, right? It's
absolutely.
when I send an email to a principal and I get an email back saying, sorry, I'm not going to respond between 8 and 3 o'clock because I'm in classrooms. That's
Yeah,
part of a culture that principal has created to prioritize instructional leadership. I'm
that's
gonna ask
right.
one last one. So in your final chapter, you ask, how do the teachers I supervise perceive me as an instructional leader?
Yeah.
So this is June, end of the school year for most schools in the US. Do you recommend that leaders send a survey or ask teachers, how do you perceive me as an instructional leader? Would that be a useful reflective practice? What do
Goes back to that word culture. If there's a culture for that,
you? Mhm.
right? Because see, if there's no culture for it, it's no telling what kind of responses you may get, and
Mm,
those responses could be counterproductive,
I see.
right?
Mhm.
But if there's a culture of transparency, right? A culture of vulnerability, and folks know how to respond professionally without tearing down.
Right.
All that has to be built so that leader now I feel very comfortable in giving my staff this survey because I know it's going to be helpful, as opposed to it creates a wider gap or rift between administration and teachers. It's insulting. Maybe it may never be able to get back to where I was with a particular teacher because of the overwhelming honesty that was in
Right.
the response. I always talk about the having a culture of instructional leadership.
Yeah.
Because if there's no culture for instructional leadership, then I'm not going to be welcoming of you coming into my classroom. So as an extension of that, with the question, a culture of transparency,
Mhm.
right? When we've created that, and that's just through the collegiality that we have on an ongoing basis. Now, because I did it, I gave them those kinds of surveys. I don't think I put it in this book,
Mhm.
but the culture was such that I knew that they would not tear me down.
Right, right. So
They
if
would
so,
they
let's say
would
I
be
haven't created
constructive.
that culture yet. So would you suggest that I still either reflect on it myself as a principal? How do the teachers I supervise perceive me as an instructional leader? Or tap a few trusted staff members to ask
That's
them
right.
or
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah, those trusted staff members, those ones, because like I think about, and I think a lot of principals have these folks, these folks in the building that, I don't like to use the word in the inner circle because that conjures up some other things.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is I did have staff always. I led 4 different schools, and I did have staff that were just a little bit more comfortable with me than others,
Yes.
right? That could be brutally honest with me more so than others, who were friendlier toward me
Yeah.
than others. And because they were friendlier toward me, they could say, Kafele, let's talk about that thing you said at the staff meeting, or let's talk about that thing you wrote in the bulletin, right? Or that, whatever it is, they're comfortable. Whereas someone else, I'd never approach him with that. Never.
Yes.
Right. So those folks are going to tell you, and quite frankly, those folks did tell me,
Yes.
right? Because they felt comfortable in our relationship.
Yes. Wow. You have so many pearls of wisdom, but I will pause it there because in line with your short book, let's keep the podcast so people actually listen.
I
Where
appreciate you.
else can leaders find out about your work?
Yeah, I appreciate that. My life is on principalkafele.com. They can just go there, principalkafele.com. My social media is there, my books, my videos, my Saturday morning live stream. Everything is there. Even my summer institute, everything is there. Principalkafele.com.
Perfect. And that's Principal Kafele.com. You should go check out his work. Thank you so much, Principal Kafele. I appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation, and you are just an inspirational leader for us all. So thank you for your work.
I appreciate you. Thank you.